Welcome to another gentle journey through the quiet corridors of ancient history. Tonight, we will walk slowly through the story of Medusa, one of mythology's most misunderstood figures. Let your breathing settle into a comfortable rhythm as we explore her tale together. There is no need to focus intensely on every detail. Simply allow the words to wash over you like waves on a distant shore, carrying you toward peaceful rest. The story of Medusa begins not with terror, but with beauty. In the earliest tellings, she was mortal, born to ancient sea deities in a time when the boundaries between divine and human were fluid and ever-changing. Her parents, Phorcys and Ceto, were primordial beings of the deep ocean, creatures whose existence stretched back to the very foundation of the world. From them, Medusa inherited her connection to the sea's mysterious depths, though she herself remained beautifully, vulnerably human. Medusa lived with her two immortals. Medusa alone remained mortal, her beauty unmarked by the supernatural horror that characterized her siblings. Her hair fell in lustrous waves, dark as the ocean depths from which her family emerged. Her eyes, before they gained their deadly power, were said to hold the shifting colors of the sea itself. In some versions of her story, Medusa served as a priestess in the temple of Athena, goddess of wisdom and warfare. The temple was a sacred space, its marble columns reaching toward the sky like prayers made stone. Here, among the offerings of olive oil and woven cloth, Medusa tended to the eternal flame that honored the virgin goddess. Her days were filled with quiet ritual, the soft whisper of sandaled feet on stone floors, and the gentle maintenance of sacred spaces. The ancient world moved at a different pace than our own. Time flowed like honey, thick and golden, measured not by the frantic ticking of clocks, but by the slow progression of seasons, the gradual aging of stone, the patient accumulation of dust on forgotten. She swept the temple floors each morning as the sun cast long shadows through the doorways. She arranged fresh flowers before the statue of Athena, their petals soft and fragrant in the cool morning air. But the gods of ancient Greece were not distant, benevolent figures. They walked among mortals, their emotions as vast and unpredictable as the forces of nature they embodied. Poseidon, god of the sea and earthquakes, moved through the world with the power of tsunamis behind his eyes. His desire, when it fell upon mortals, was as overwhelming and destructive as the waves that could swallow entire coastlines. The incident that changed Medusa's life forever occurred within the sacred walls of Athena's temple. The details of this moment have been told and retold across centuries, each version shifting like sand beneath the storyteller's feet. In some tellings, Poseidon pursued Medusa with relentless passion, cornering her in the very heart of the temple where she sought sanctuary. The violation occurred on the holy. Other versions speak of a consensual encounter, a meeting of mortal and god that bloomed into something both beautiful and forbidden. In these gentler retellings, Medusa and Poseidon came together willingly, their love transcending the boundaries between human and divine. Yet even in these versions, the location remained the same: the sacred temple of Athena, where no such intimacy should have occurred. The goddess Athena discovered what had transpired within her sacred space. Her anger was not the hot, quick flame of human rage, but something far more terrible: the cold, calculated fury of divine justice. Some ancient voices whispered that Athena's punishment was misdirected, that her wrath should have fallen upon Poseidon rather than the mortal woman. But the gods operated by their own logic, their own sense of cosmic balance that mortals could rarely comprehend. The transformation began slowly, like a fever settling into weary bones. Medusa's beautiful hair, once her pride and crowning, strand by strand, lock by lock, it shifted and writhed until serpents coiled where tresses once cascaded. The change was not immediate. Some accounts suggest it took days, even weeks, for the metamorphosis to complete itself. Each morning, Medusa would wake to find more of her humanity slipping away, replaced by something altogether more terrible and strange. Her skin grew pale and cold, taking on the texture of marble that had been kissed by centuries of sea spray. Her eyes, once warm and inviting, became instruments of death. The transformation was thorough and irreversible. Where once a beautiful priestess had walked through temple halls, now there moved a creature whose very gaze could turn living flesh to stone. The power of the deadly gaze developed gradually, like a skill that must be learned through terrible practice. At first, perhaps, the transformation was incomplete, her gaze merely unsettling rather than lethal. But as days passed and the curse took fuller hold, animals began to freeze mid-step when they encountered her. Word of Medusa's transformation spread slowly through the ancient world, carried by traders and travelers who whispered the tale around campfires and in market squares. The story grew with each telling, becoming more elaborate and frightening. She became not just a cursed woman, but a monster to be feared, a cautionary tale about the dangers of attracting divine attention. Medusa and her sisters retreated to the edges of the known world, to islands shrouded in mist where few mortals dared to venture. Here, they made their home among rocky caves and wind-carved cliffs. The immortal sisters, Steno and Euryale, shared their sister's exile, their loyalty unshaken by her transformation. They had always been monsters in the eyes of mortals, but now Medusa had joined them in their terrible sisterhood. The island where they lived became a place of legend, spoken of in hushed tones by sailors who claimed to have glimpsed its shores through fog and storm. Some described it as a garden of stone statues, the petrified remains of those. Others painted it as a desolate wasteland where nothing grew and no birds sang, a place where life itself had fled in fear. In this remote sanctuary, Medusa learned to live with her curse. She discovered that polished bronze could serve as a mirror, allowing her to see her reflection without the deadly consequences that befell any living thing that met her direct gaze. She learned to move carefully, to announce her presence so that no unsuspecting creature might accidentally look upon her and be transformed to stone. The isolation was perhaps the cruelest aspect of her punishment. Where once she had lived among people, participating in the daily rhythms of human community, now she existed in terrible solitude. Her sisters provided companionship, but they were creatures of a different nature, their immortal perspectives alien to her mortal heart. She remained fundamentally human, despite her monstrous appearance, capable of loneliness and sorrow in ways that her sisters could not fully comprehend. Medusa might have lived out her days in this remote sanctuary, gradually fading into legend and half-remembered nightmare. But the fates had other plans for her story. Perseus, son of Zeus and the mortal princess Danae, had grown to young manhood under circumstances as extraordinary as his divine parentage. His mortal grandfather, fearing a prophecy that his grandson would one day kill him, had locked Danae and her infant son in a wooden chest and cast them adrift on the wine-dark sea. They had washed ashore on the island of Seriphos, where they were taken in by Dictys, a kind fisherman who raised Perseus as his own son. King Polydex of Seriphos desired Danae for his wife, but Perseus had grown into a strong young man who protected his mother from unwanted suitors. To remove this obstacle, Polydex devised a clever plan. He announced his intention to marry another woman and demanded that all the young men of the island bring gifts for the wedding feast. Perseus had Polydex seized upon this rash promise, knowing that such a quest would likely result in Perseus's death. He held the young man to his word, and Perseus found himself bound by honor and pride to attempt what many considered impossible. The task ahead seemed insurmountable. How could a mortal man hope to defeat a creature whose very gaze meant instant death? But Perseus was no ordinary mortal. Divine blood flowed in his veins, and the gods themselves took interest in his quest. Athena appeared to him first, her gray eyes gleaming with wisdom and purpose. She offered him her polished bronze shield, its surface bright as a mirror, and counseled him on how it might be used to see Medusa's reflection without meeting her deadly gaze directly. Hermes, messenger of the gods and guide of heroes, brought additional gifts. He provided Perseus with his own winged sandals, which would allow the hero to fly swift as thought across vast distances. The god also gave him a curved sword, its edge sharp enough to cut through anything. The nymphs, those ancient spirits of wild places, contributed the final element to Perseus's arsenal, the cap of Hades, lord of the underworld. This magical helm rendered its wearer invisible, allowing him to approach unseen and undetected. With these divine gifts, Perseus was as well equipped as any mortal hero could hope to be. The journey to Medusa's island took Perseus across the breadth of the Mediterranean world. He flew over sleeping cities and moonlit seas, his winged sandals carrying him through air as thin and cold as mountain snow. Below him, the world spread out like a vast tapestry woven from darkness and starlight. He passed over fishing boats, whose crews slept unaware of the hero flying overhead, their nets drying in the night breeze. As he drew closer to his destination, the very air seemed to grow heavier, charged with an otherworldly presence that made his skin prickle with unease. The island emerged from the morning mist like a dream, half remembered. These were the remains of previous visitors, warriors and sailors who had come seeking glory or treasure, and found only death in the form of Medusa's terrible gaze. Perseus landed softly on the beach, his invisible form leaving no tracks in the sand. The island was unnaturally quiet, with none of the usual sounds of gulls or waves lapping against stone. Even the wind seemed muted here, as if afraid to disturb the eternal silence that Medusa's presence had imposed upon this place. He made his way inland, following a path that wound between the petrified figures of those who had come before him. Some were frozen in attitudes of terror, their stone faces locked in expressions of final horror. Others seemed almost peaceful, as if death had come so quickly that they had no time for fear. Each statue told its own story of a life cut short by an encounter with powers beyond mortal comprehension. The cave where Medusa and her sisters dwelt lay at the island's heart, hidden among tumbled rocks and twists in its polished surface. He could see the entrance to the cave, dark as a wound in the earth itself. Inside the cave, the three Gorgon sisters slept, Steno and Euryale, the immortal ones, lay curled like massive serpents, their bronze wings folded against their backs. Between them rested Medusa, smaller than her sisters, but no less terrible. Her hair writhed even in sleep, the serpents that had replaced her human locks moving in slow, hypnotic patterns. Perseus raised his sword, its divine edge gleaming in the dim light that filtered through the cave mouth. Using the shield's reflection to guide his aim, he brought the blade down in one swift, clean stroke. Medusa's head separated from her shoulders without resistance, the magical sword cutting through flesh and bone as easily as a warm knife through honey. Even in death, Medusa's power remained undiminished. Perseus quickly gathered up the severed head, careful not to look directly upon it even in its lifeless state. He placed it in the leather pouch that Hermes had provided. From Medusa's spilled blood, two miraculous beings sprang forth. Pegasus, the winged horse, emerged fully formed and magnificent, his coat white as foam on ocean waves. Chrysaor, a giant with a golden sword, arose beside him. Both were children of Poseidon, conceived during that fateful encounter in Athena's temple so many years before. In death, Medusa had given birth to wonders that would themselves become legends. Perseus made his escape as the immortal Gorgon sisters awakened to discover their loss. Their wails of grief and rage echoed across the island and far out to sea, a sound so terrible that sailors would speak of it in whispers for generations to come. But Perseus was already far away, carried by Hermes' winged sandals, across the wine-dark waters toward home. The journey back was not without adventure. Perseus used Medusa's head as a weapon, turning enemies to stone with strategic reveals of its terrible power. When the sea monster Cetus threatened to devour the princess Andromeda, he won Andromeda's hand in marriage and ruled beside her with wisdom and justice. Upon returning to Seriphos, Perseus found that King Polydex had continued to pursue his mother Danae despite his absence. The hero arrived at the royal court where Polydex was hosting a feast, confident that Perseus had perished in his quest. When the king demanded proof of the hero's success, Perseus gladly obliged. He revealed Medusa's head to the assembled court, turning Polydex and his followers to stone in an instant. Perseus later presented Medusa's head to Athena as an offering, acknowledging the goddess's role in his successful quest. Athena accepted the gift and placed it upon her aegis, that magical breastplate or shield that was one of her most powerful symbols. There, Medusa's face remained, her deadly gaze now serving to protect rather than destroy. In this new role, Medusa became something far more complex than a simple monster. Her image appeared on temples and public. The same power that had once been a curse became a blessing. Her deadly stare turned outward to guard against those who would do harm to the innocent. Artists and craftsmen incorporated Medusa's image into their works with remarkable frequency. Her face appeared on coins and pottery, in mosaics and frescoes, carved into the facades of important buildings. The image evolved over time, sometimes emphasizing her monstrous aspects, sometimes softening them to create a more melancholy or even beautiful representation. The Romans inherited Medusa's image from the Greeks and made it their own. They saw in her a symbol of divine protection, placing her likeness on military shields and standards. Soldiers carried her image into battle, believing that her power would turn their enemies to stone as surely as it had protected Athena's temples. Throughout the centuries, Medusa's story continued to evolve and adapt to new cultural contexts. Medieval Christians transformed, Renaissance artists rediscovered her classical origins, creating works that emphasized both her beauty and her terror in equal measure. The story took on new dimensions during the Age of Exploration, when European travelers claimed to have encountered snake-haired women in distant lands. These tales, though certainly fictional, demonstrate how deeply Medusa's image had penetrated the collective imagination. She had become a universal symbol, recognizable across cultures and centuries. In more recent times, feminist scholars and artists have reclaimed Medusa as a symbol of female rage and empowerment. They point out that her transformation was the result of victimization, not villainy, and that her deadly gaze can be read as a metaphor for the power of the feminine to resist and overcome oppression. This interpretation sees Perseus not as a hero, but as another in a long line of men who sought to destroy powerful women. Her ability to turn viewers to stone becomes a metaphor for the paralyzing effect of confronting our own deepest fears and darkest impulses. In this reading, Perseus's victory represents the hero's journey toward psychological integration and wholeness. Literature and popular culture continue to find new uses for Medusa's image and story. She appears in novels and films, video games, and graphic novels, each iteration adding new layers to her already complex mythology. Some portray her sympathetically, as a victim of divine injustice. Others maintain her status as a monster, though often one with understandable motivations. The enduring appeal of Medusa's story lies perhaps in its fundamental ambiguity. She is simultaneously victim and monster, beautiful and terrible, protective and destructive. These contradictions mirror the complexity of human nature itself, our capacity for both creation and destruction. These ancient stories were never intended as literal truth, but as vessels for deeper meanings that transcend the specific details of plot and character. Medusa's transformation speaks to universal experiences of loss, change, and the ways in which trauma can fundamentally alter who we are. Her isolation on that distant island reflects the loneliness that can accompany any profound change in our lives. Her deadly gaze becomes a metaphor for the ways in which pain can make us dangerous to others, even when we wish them no harm. Her ultimate transformation from monster to protector suggests the possibility of redemption, the way in which our greatest weaknesses can sometimes become our greatest strengths. The ancient Greeks understood that their gods and monsters were reflections of themselves, projections of human nature writ large upon the cosmic stage. In Medusa, they created a figure who embodied the terrible beauty of transformation, the price of divine attention, and as we drift toward sleep, we might carry with us not the image of Medusa as monster, but as a figure of profound transformation. Her story reminds us that change, even when painful, can lead to unexpected forms of power and purpose. In her serpentine locks and deadly gaze, we find not just terror, but a mirror for our own capacity to endure, to transform, and ultimately to protect what we hold dear. The waves that wash against her island still sing of transformation, of beauty lost and power gained. of the endless cycle of destruction and renewal that governs all life. In their gentle rhythm, we might find our own path to peaceful rest, knowing that even the most terrible stories can, in the end, become sources of wisdom and wonder. Let Medusa's tale fade now into the realm of dreams, where all myths ultimately reside, waiting to be rediscovered by each new generation of dreamers who seek meaning in the ancient stories that have shaped our understanding of what it means to be human.